I think the difference between the third and fourth levels of development is of particular relevance to the discussion of therapy, because if I understand you correctly, it's with the fourth level, that is organized disintegration, that the third factor emerges. One suggestion is, I think, that at that stage or level of development, something like autotherapy begins to be a real possibility. Is that accurate?
Surely, very clearly. This means I think that third level, this is genuine level for heteropsychotherapy, which is beginning of autopsychotherapy. And fourth level is completely, this is the field for clear autopsychotherapy. This is not even needed any heteropsychotherapy. Well, in the beginning for 1, 2, 3 sessions, that's all. And even this will be dangerous to exercise heteropsychotherapy.
It might be dangerous.
Dangerous.
In what way might it be dangerous?
No, well, because, well, you will, if you will have some strong influence to your client, he will have tendency to a bit go back, not too much, but on the borderline of 3 and 4, and even on second level of third level, because you will treat him as a ill people.
So your suggestion is that it may be impossible to engage in, say, person-to-person therapy with, or successful person-to-person therapy with, at the fourth stage or fourth level of development.
Yes, you know, I think that people on the fourth level are almost, in most of cases, much more developed than than physician or psychologist, and for this reason this is even difficult to try. A physician will be too sure of himself if he will have tendency to normally treat the patients on fourth level. Physicians have not this tendency to learn something from patients, and in relation to this level they should learn. Not have prevalence of tendency to treat. But excuse me, please, even in this way, to be treated very often.
You mentioned the third factor emerging here.
Yes.
It's something we haven't really discussed or asked about. The third factor emerges at the level of directive.
The beginning of third factor is very clear on the third level. This means all dynamism of third level present something from third factor, but clearly developed and very strong third factor is characteristic for fourth level.
What is the third factor?
Well, third factor is?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is, in individual experience, I can describe this as a factor with positive and negative attitude toward oneself, and positive and negative attitude toward influence of environment. This means attitude of continuous choice between some characters in oneself, negative characters and positive. Third factor, see clearly what should be eliminated, what is negative in your inner psychic milieu, and what is positive. And little by little it accepts positive sides and rejects negative, and the same in relation to external environment. For this reason, positive maladjustment on the highest level is acting in the field of third factor. I repeat, this is continuous attitude to choice.
So it's a rejection sort of what is given biologically,
yes,
and also what is socially determined.
The same.
It's an attempt to transcend it?
Surely. And well, why third factor? Because we have first factor, this is constitution, heredity, second factor, environment, and this is third, autonomic, authentic factor, who decide about negative or positive attitude toward first factor, and negative and positive attitude toward second factor.
That's puzzling to me because you described the fifth level as being a level in which reintegration occurs, and yet what you just described is that the third factor is involved in the process of sort of accepting or incorporating and rejecting on the
Yes.
other hand.
Yes.
That sounds like something other than integration. It sounds like a selection process, selecting that which you would like to be or become and rejecting that which you wouldn't.
Yes.
In what sense is the term integration applicable at the highest level of development?
Well, I think that's rejecting. This means negative attitude toward oneself, some characters of oneself, and toward the environment means preparation for a higher level of integration. Without this, we cannot understand secondary integration. And I permit me to say that I do not use the term of reintegration, because reintegration means to coming back to some of previous levels.
I see.
But this is secondary integration. This means higher level of integration after passing to all experience of all periods of all levels.
Could you characterize, if possible, the nature of that highest level of integration?
Surely with pleasure. Well, only permit me to say that on the fourth level we have many other dynamism characteristic and well specific for this level. This means object-subject in oneself, higher level of empathy, ability for auto-psychotherapy and self-education, and so on. You have plenty of such dynamism. They are always present at the previous levels. This means you can see object-subject in oneself, third factor, on the third level, only not so clearly elaborated, not so consciously elaborated, not so systematized. For this reason, fourth level means multi-level disintegration, organized, systematized. And now, well, your trial to answer for your questions. For your question, well, you know that this is the most difficult for me to describe clearly. This means with participation of emotional experience to describe fifth level, because I do not feel myself ready to describe this. This means I can intellectually or objectively only to know something about this, but not by my own experience. And for this reason, well, this is very difficult. But what I see as prolongation of fourth level, I see such a dynamism like autonomy, high level of autonomy. Well, this is continuation of action of third factor, authenticity. Next, you have responsibility, but responsibility never based on something like external conditions of contract, but responsibility on the basis of sensitivity. If you are sensitive toward many form of reality, you are responsible without any formal obligation. And ideal of personality. This means you see clearly, like something concrete, your ideal of personality. And you are on the level of personality, because secondary integration means a level of personality. And well, one more, if you permit me, I will answer for the question also of Leo. This means here at the level of secondary integration, and this means personality, we see two highest characters which are very, very, I think, significant for the personality level. This means two essences. And this is, I can repeat, not only psychological but philosophical approach. This means they are two essences, individual essence and common or social essence. And what is characters of individual essence? Well, briefly, I can say that individual with such a level present something like very important stable interests. So, well, this could be social interest, artistic interests, well, many others, even political interests and so on. Next, this will be such a character toward exclusivity in friendship and in love and so on. And third, this will be conscious identification with oneself and one's own history of development. These three characters, perhaps we can have many others, but they are dominant, present something very individual and very stabilized. Next, from the side of common essence, we have, as I already discussed, empathy, highest level of empathy, responsibility, autonomy, authenticity, and others. And these two essences form, well, express the highest level of development of personality. And one more thing. All such qualities are not changeable from the point of view of qualities, but they are changing quantitatively. They could increase, but central qualities, as I presented, are not changeable. And this, I think, this is not only psychological problem posed in such a way, but also philosophical. This is basis for, I can say, for identification with oneself and identification with level of social tendencies. This means you are stabilized. You see yourself as qualitatively unchangeable, as idiomatic, as somebody who is, if you permit this, not in metaphysical sense, but eternal. Something like genuine, something like unchangeable. You can develop yourself more and more, but quantitatively. Well, you can elaborate even new qualities, but they will not take place of the central qualities, which are self-conscious, self-developing, chosen, and educated.
How does this compare with the development of an identity which you regard as worthwhile? The term identity is one that frequently recurs in the psychological literature, and I'm wondering whether it has a place in the highest level of development that you're describing.
Yes. This means this will be identity with his own individual traits, essence, complete identity, and and partial identity with others. Why partial? Excuse me, please, for such. Why partial? Because I cannot accept that this is possible on the highest level, complete identity with others. You can have complete understanding, help, empathy, but never complete identity, because you will be lost in this. You will be annihilated in this. And even, I think that's conditio sine qua non to have high empathy toward others, high understanding, high level of help. This is conditio sine qua non, is to preserve his own identity and not be identified completely with others. People who identify completely with others is rather on the low level. For instance, primitive syntony of some sample models, they how I can say, not remind about their own personality, but sacrifice all for children, without reflection, without understanding, but they are in syntony. And this is something like very dangerous. This means I accept identity, processes of identification with oneself and with one's ideal, but partial identity with others, which is very high. Perhaps this term partial is well something like introducing something like not very high level, but this is very high level.
Is there anything at the second level or second level of integration? It seems to me that there's a possibility of loss of freedom. You talked about stabilization and presumably the coordination of all the dynamisms at this level. Does this preclude freedom to act?
You know, freedom, this is, as you know yourself, this is very difficult problem. I think that we are never free in such a current opinion about freedom. This means at the second level, perhaps, we are much more free in relation to some instinctive attitude towards some emotional attitude, because we can be this and the other, go in one direction, in another direction, in third direction, and so on. And perhaps this is something like spurious freedom, I can say. If you are passing to the third level, you begins to be less free, because you see hierarchy of aims, hierarchy of levels, and you will go in this direction. More you are advanced in this way, you accept more this way. You are not free, but you accept this lack of freedom as something very valuable. And next, on the fourth level, you are more and more not free, but your personality begins to be free. And at the level of personality, this is any freedom in your inner psychic media, only your personality is, I can say, auto-deterministic. You think that you always will do such and such things. This is impossibility to choose something. You cannot choose something bad, something negative, never. From this point of view, you are not free, and from another point of view, you are completely free.
So the lack of freedom is in part limiting yourself to some call to what ought to be, rather than what you just simply choose to make.
To your personality and to your unchangeability of your basic qualities. And you like this, that you are not here, you are not free, because you will be somebody spurious. You will be not yourself.
Your distinction between common essence and individual essence at the level of personality is really an attempt to allow for individual differences at that level.
Yes.
Is it not?
Yes, very clearly. This means we have common traits, and we have individual traits, and each from these two essences are conditions sine qua non for activity of another. If you will, how I can say, lose yourself, if you will dissipate yourself, you will never present your social essence, your reflective help, your conscious empathy, because you will be annihilated.
Notice that one of the things that seems to be absent from the description you've given of the second level of integration is level of self-awareness. I'm wondering whether this is of secondary importance at that high level of second level of integration, or whether it is of primary importance.
Of primary importance, perhaps I did not mention about this, but I mentioned in relation to fourth level, and fifth level is continuation in relation to qualities of the fourth level. This means surely self-consciousness means very, very important factor on the fifth level.
The reason I ask is that in terms of describing the goals of therapy, whether it be autotherapy or some other form. Some orientations have placed primary emphasis on the role of self-awareness, being aware of yourself almost regardless of whether you're satisfied or dissatisfied with what you find when you are. It seems that your description is one which is at least more complicated in that you are describing the importance of self-awareness, and secondly, some judgment, moral judgment about the rightness or wrongness of what you find. Sort of the neutrality, or the attempts at maintaining neutrality in some therapeutic orientations would, I imagine, in your position, be detrimental to development. Is that right?
No, perhaps I do not understand your question.
Well, I'm suggesting that it may be possible for someone to know himself well.
Yes.
And to live a life without pretense, but to live a life with which he is very dissatisfied, and he may even be making choices with which he has, in effect, no sympathy. He may be choosing to do things which are other than what he feels he ought to do. But he may be aware that he is making the choice. He may be aware that he is being something other than rational within his own framework.
Yes, I understand.
So
well,
self-knowledge then is something short of the characteristics that you describe as
I do not think
the highest
so.
level.
I do not. I think this is very strict collaboration on the higher level of development between self-consciousness and moral judgment and moral feelings. This means, well, individual is very conscious that his way of development is very difficult, very often not pleasant, but he knows also that this is only way to develop himself. And like Spencer told us, I prefer to be, how I can say, unhappy Socrates than happy, how I can say, pork.
Pig.
Pig. Excuse me, please. Well, this means this is not this is in some extent well, rejection to the marginal, the factor of pleasure or displeasure, but introducing to the center the factor of development. And this development is based on self-consciousness and moral judgment and empathy and so on and so on.
But it also suggests that it is a combination of the two, as if those two cannot be independently considered a criterion for or a goal for treatment. Because it seems to me that an individual may be doing what he feels he ought to do, but do so without any degree of self-awareness.
Well, I cannot.
Someone who may be rule-bound.
Perhaps, but you know, well, this is my experience with patients, and I think many patients, and I think that this is these two factors are on the higher level in very strict collaboration. They are not going separately. They could go separately on the second level, beginning of third level, not on the fourth level.
I'd like to change the topic, if I may, a little bit. What we talked about therapy earlier, and it seems to me that both your views on auto-psychotherapy as well as your views on therapy for individuals at lower levels of development implies that perhaps the psychiatrist or the psychologist are not the only ones that should be involved in therapy, that there are many others in the community that would certainly be as relevant, not only professionals, but surely also people in the family milieu in which the person lives, his friends, professionals like his teacher or social workers, perhaps. Would you like to sort of spell out the range of possibilities as to who is involved in therapy? And
well, even I can begin my answer in this way, that future society should not permit the elimination of other people besides of psychiatrists and psychologists in treatment. Because in my opinion this is fairly dangerous, and this means that they are very isolated people who have opinion that they are specialists, but to be specialist in human personalities, well, this is very, very difficult task. And I do not think so that until now existing education of physicians, psychiatrists, and education of psychologists could give them the responsibility for human destiny. I think that and psychologists and psychiatrists should be prepared in another way as a clinical psychologist or as a clinical psychiatrist in counseling and so on. This should be a very great elaboration of new program. For instance, I do not think so that psychiatrists, after something like 1.5 years of psychology, insufficient, could understand the patients. And with knowledge of anatomy, physiology, well, they could have biological point of view. And we see the danger and the positive sides of this biological point of view. But this is not sufficient to treat human beings. For this reason, I can answer to your question that I think that kind of nurses who will be prepared in humanities, in humanistic psychology, in sociology, in counseling and so on, will have many possibilities to help physicians and even to, in some fields, to replace physicians or psychologists. The same with somebody like social workers who should be prepared in universities with fairly different program. This means with also much more emphasis of psychology, of psychopathology, even of sociology, of philosophy and so on, and could be educated as, how I can say, as a very high level of dilettants. I think that dilettantism with very good large preparation means something much more real. That's narrow specialization. And in reality, narrow specialists are much more dilettante in reality, but they appear as not dilettante in their opinion about themselves. This means I think that's, well, I can say that I do not see this, but I see a very large, deep problem of changes in the program of education of psychiatrists, psychologists, and new education of such a people like social workers, nurses, and even somebody like parents who could form something like model for other parents and act through so-called positive infections. Positive infections in the field of parents' education, because, well, I cannot suppose that all parents will take such a higher level of studies. No, but through such a modeling and such a action of positive infection, this could be very great influence in education of people, and secondarily in treatment and in a different attitude of the parents toward children, nervous children, psychoneurotic children and so on. There are so many, so terrible errors in the field of family life, in the field of school life, and, well, in the psychiatric and psychological activity. This should be changed, and fairly radically. I know that I will not see such a changes. This is long term, but this is necessary. We are here on the very low level, excuse me for such, and in all countries, in Europe and and in the United States, and here and in many countries. Well, And after all, if theory of positive disintegration will help partially in something, I'm not sure how largely, this will be this problem of completely different treatment of nervous children, of gifted children, this is together, of psychoneurotics, and some borderline of psychoneurosis and psychosis called by Abeli, as you know, schizoneurosis.
What I find perhaps most interesting when you get enthused like this is that you seem to be reinforcing neurosis, which is very, very strange, I think, in some ways. You do that by, I think, giving the patient or your friend the kind of reinforcement that is for behavior that is sometimes considered undesirable. For example, taking an obsessive neurosis, you will support the obsession.
Yes, completely this, but well, permit me to explain my point of view. Well, this is reinforcement, but in the same time, reinforcement of self-consciousness and reinforcement of feeling of the role of psychoneurotic in development. Even if you will reinforce psychoneurosis, but in the same time you will reinforce program for positive development and self-consciousness, you will give a possibility to change lower level of psychoneurosis to higher level of psychoneurosis. And higher level of psychoneurosis means healthy, the higher level of health, in my opinion. So because you have here sensitivity, you educate such a people toward sensitivity and toward richness, toward creativity, and surely in the same time toward some difficulties. Some difficulties because you stop to be very simple man, you are complicated. But well, what Socrates told you? You know why he committed suicide? Because well, the judges told him that he transformed the simple things toward complicated things, and this is always these things. You know that in our behavioristic psychology, excuse me please for such a small critics, this is always the tendency to go from more complicated to more simple, and this is tendency to explain more complicated by more simple, and this is always contrary. You can explain much more simple but much more complicated, and well, this is the problem. And I do not see any possibility to resolve such a problem like besides of this way of reasoning and this way of observations. I think that society could give much more attention and much more respect to mostly of psychoneurotics, and to stop to respect strengths of primitive attitude in relation to psychopaths. I repeat this not for my imagination, but I see very clearly and very really the danger for society of such a combination.
Well, part of the problem, it seems to me, is one of deciding how to select people who might be in a position to offer therapy. We talked a little bit a few minutes ago about some of the differences in training of those who are involved in therapy or in positions where therapy is possible. How could we select individuals for who are planning to become therapists or hoping to become therapists? Who would be the most effective in that role?
Yes, well, I permitted here for first time in my work to give in this book something like evocation, how I can call this, to psychoneurotics, something appeal to psychoneurotics. This is something. This is not scientific. This is very literary, but I was thinking many times, and I decided to say this. And here you have one verse. Well, big-rated psychoneurotics, among others, that you are treated in the place of treating others. Well, why I am going in such a way? This means I think that's this is erroneous way to reject very often nervous people and psychoneurotics from the field of psychiatry, of psychology, of priesthood, and so on. I think that they are most valued people only. You should accept the candidates from a higher level of psychoneurosis. This means with self-consciousness, with empathy and so on. And I think that such a people will be the most valued. And how to select such a people? Well, I do not think that methods used by positive disintegration are sufficient. Never. But I can demonstrate from time to time, if I could have possibilities to demonstrate that even such a methods give something like fairly clear diagnosis of personality development. This means biography with diagnosis of dynamism characteristic for each level. Next, they will be, well, test with verbal stimuli. Next, Rorschach with interpretation from the point of view of positive disintegration. And I use neurological examination, interpreted from the point of view of levels. Not sufficient test, not good test, but giving some hypothesis verified by this test. And even interview elaborated in a special manner. And I think that's all such methods, together with some period of observation of candidates, and with utilization of other tests of intelligence and so on, could give you something like medium for diagnosis and for selections, but not sufficient, surely not sufficient, but many times more valuable than nothingness. And we have, from the point of view of selection, from the point of view of personality, we are at the level of nothingness. We can give something like diagnosis of intellectual development, intelligence, surely, psychomotor development, but in relation to personality, well, they are multifactors, multifactorial diagnosis, but I do not think so that such methods could give diagnosis of personality development.
You are not opposed then to other forms of therapy after you've selected the type of people whose development is such that they're subject to autopsychotherapy or therapy through positive disintegration. You're not opposed to drug therapy, behavioristic therapies, group therapies, as long as they select their clients very
surely,
carefully.
Never. This means I see clearly that in some fields of anxiety, for instance, phobias, this means mostly caused by something like shocks, like external difficulties and so on. Behavioristic therapy could be very good. In some troubles, neurotic troubles in the field of sexuality, psychoanalysis could give some good results, one-sided but good results. For instance, I use very often together with my therapy relax therapy of Schultz.
Mm-hmm.
And well, so-called mirror therapy. Also, I use even very often not orthodox psychoanalytic therapy of Sesh A. You have heard of this?
Sesh A?
Sesh A. This is Swiss physician, psychiatrist, who is not orthodox, but after all, her basic approach is to permit to schizophrenics to be in to stay in schizophrenic worlds. Not to hinder them, not to stop, but through help, through love, through empathy, to give possibility for the patient to be oriented little by little in the value of schizophrenic world and in the value of so-called real world. And this combination could help. And I use very often additionally this method. This means I am nothing to do with one way only of therapy. But well, surely this is one of central therapies in my treatment, or even I can say central therapy. But this means not that I reject or not use many others. I use very often relaxation therapy of Schultz.
What you said about encouraging the schizophrenic to sort of accept the value of his schizophrenic world suggests to me that there are times when chemotherapy may interfere with that process
Yes.
by reducing the level of excitement that is characteristic of the schizophrenic world. You may actually interfere with the natural developmental course that individual may be on. Would you agree with that?
Well, surely this means, well, I have one, I will give you an example. As a very young psychiatrist, I have been, well, a physician. I have had division there. And, well, I tried in my first year of practice to persuade many psychotics that they are not right in a good way, but after all, I discussed this. And well, one lady tried to beat me, but terribly, with something from, well, something very hard. Well, because she have had something like, well, how I can say, obsessive thinking or more about the place of his activity, and I know this, that she never have been there, and I discussed with her, my dear lady, you have never been here in this place, in this town. And well, this was her reaction. After such an accident, I never tried to persuade them and to be against, rather in a very mild way, to give all sympathy or empathy and to stimulate something like interest in many things. And I have seen one of the best institutions near Paris, yes, for children. They have had their psychoneurotics and nervous children and schizophrenic children, autistic children. And the method was like this, that they never introduce autistic children in something like strict stereotypic regime. Never ask them to be subordinated. They permitted them to be with animals, with trees, with gardens, with flowers, with all possibilities. And they waited for something like active interest from those children. And very often they were waiting 1 year. But they were always ready to help, always ready to be much more open. And this was, I think, the best method, and I have seen results. This means not any stereotype in relation to treatment of such a children.
Go ahead.
I want to return to clinical practice for a moment. You talked earlier of your ability to see through art or music, through an external manifestation of someone's creativity, to be able to assess what level they were at least to a reasonable degree. How do you approach that same problem with a client or patient, friend, let's say, who comes to you, who is neither an artist nor a musician or any of those other things? What are the signs you look for? Do you ask them to write or paint or draw?
No, but I have always interviewed, or I ask him surely to bring me, if they have something from painting or from sculpture, to bring me this, if they agree with this. And very often I see such a exposition. And next, one of our tests is test of biography, where I ask to write very largely about all abilities, how I can say, experience, emotional experience and so on. And I have in each case such a testing. This means for about 8 pages, well, biography. And I meditate on this. I take this, I go through one or many times, and I am acquainted with all this. This means also with social activity of people, with all emotional difficulties, with abilities like art and poetry, drama, and so on and so on. And after I discuss with them many things. And as I told you, I like very much, this is not possible always, this is rather about 30%, perhaps 25%, but I like very much to go, to have contact not in my medical room, how you call this, but well, to promenade, to go with people, to go to the restaurants, cafeteria, promenade, theater, cinema, excursions and so on. And I think surely physician in such a condition or psychologist should have very great moral responsibility for the client, because such a conditions would be very difficult and even sometimes disastrous. But if you have complete moral responsibility and you see clear interest of the patient, go.
What you're suggesting is something that would place an even heavier responsibility on therapists in practice now. At least those therapists who prefer to spend that 1 hour a week with an individual. You're suggesting something that's far more time-consuming and certainly
surely. This
much
means
more personal.
this should be should be mixture of methods. Complicated methods, partially this, partially another, but well, I avoid this, I accept this, that's well, I treat the profession of physician, of psychologist, as something, well, as something, permit me, as well, as something clearly idealistic in the concrete sense, never abstract. Well, money is money. We should have money. This is necessary, but this is not first problem.
When you go on with your levels and talking about the treatment of psychoneurosis, I get the opinion from your book and from your theory that as a person moves up the levels, he becomes a more complex organism. He's hierarchically arranged. He's got more value judgments involved in everything. And I'm drawn to an analogy with some methods of treatment where they say, well, this is obviously a case where you just can't handle the degree of the complexity, so we'll give you some drugs, and we'll lower down the degree to a point where you can handle it, and then after I will take that away and go back up. And I was wondering if you ever used that.
Surely. Periodically, always. Only, this kind of treatment with self-consciousness, that's, well, will evacuate something like memory of experience of history of development, which presents something like great difficulties and so on, presented by physicians. This is something terribly bad, like lobotomy. What was with very many creative people after lobotomy. They became vegetative beings completely, like almost idiots. And from creative people you became somebody like this. And well, this tendency to annihilate memory in history of individual means something periodically, this means something perhaps sometimes good. But to reject this very frequently, evacuate this very frequently, or for long time of duration, this is method of dehumanization. Is that
Dehumanization?
Wait. Without any respect toward human being. This is like silence in relation to shock therapy. Well, we'll do shock for 100 people, and will lie in silence and in immobility. And this is all
Cure.
cured. Yes, please excuse me.
What is your opinion of sensitivity groups?
Well, I ask always sensitivity toward what, in relation to what, and for what, for which aim sensitivity, or sensitivity toward, for instance, as I think I told you, sensitivity toward perversions, sensitivity toward criminality, sensitivity toward drug addictions, sensitivity toward brutality. And this could be sensitivity, elaboration of sensitivity toward empathy, toward good psychological relation with others, toward responsibility, toward social, large social relation. Surely such a sensitivity treatment is very positive. But we should ask always, what means sensitivity group? And you should even ask for a characteristic of this concrete group which introduce sensitivity therapy. What means sensitivity in this case?
If we can go back a minute to the idea of second integration again. In my mind, a dichotomy comes up. Part of me says, is reminded by the statement that Fritz Perls made when he said, I don't want to have a character because that implies stagnation. And the other part of me, when thinking about a person with personality, like on the second level, is that, well, I've made all these decisions already, therefore I don't have to go back and look at them. I can go farther on and do others. Can you comment on which approach is more valid to what you're saying?
No, well, I think that's I answered in a different way for such a questions with my characteristic of elaborating of two essences, social and individual. Personality means something not analogous to character, but after all, this is the highest level of organization of human being. And well, you cannot reject your personality. You cannot say, well, I do not want, like Perl told in relation to character, I do not want to have personality. This is impossible. If you are going toward personality, you accept this personality, even with all difficulties.
This may seem like carrying your theory a little far, romanticizing it. I'd like you to comment on what happens at the point of a physical organism's death in regard to its personality. Like, is this related entirely to physical existence, the idea of personality?
Oh, this is a special question. If you want my private opinion, yes, I can give you. I prefer surely to speak not in such a conditions about this, but, well, I have not here any elaborated point of view. I can say that my need for empirical answers, for very experimental and empirical answers are so strong that even if I have something like fairly large and deep experience, I do not accept such experience as sufficient. This means I can say you that I have many experience in this field, but they are not sufficient to answer in a good experimental empirical way. Perhaps in time of death, some people will have something like empirical approach. Even I think that in the future we will have some people, they will want to demonstrate for group of friends what is it in time of dying. If they could have something like self-consciousness, something from these moments. Well, I have had some practice here as a young physician. I liked very much to assist the dying people in hospitals in Geneva. And I observed all this, and I have seen, well, very great, very very significant difference of the state of self-consciousness at time of dying. How many times I heard well that the last words was I love you forever. How many times? This is something. But perhaps this will be much more profitable to hear something like description of the state, even fragmentary, how it is. And I think that in the future we will have something. We will have something like courage to develop such a potential, and not a very high courage in aggressivity and in wars and so on, but this kind of attitude.
Have you arbitrarily assigned age groups, as to attaining these levels of?
Surely, madam. Only I occupied myself with levels, partially independently from the age. But even this is very possible at the age of adolescence and adulthood. But this is very possible in nuclei to observe such a levels even at the age of 3, 4, even 2.5, and until the period of puberty. This is possible, but this will be rather fragmentary, not very strict.
So how would you account for children who have been described as geniuses, at a very young age, like even before adolescence?
No, well, surely we can see very clearly such a nuclei for genius, and even this will be much more difficult in children to observe something like nuclei for personality development. This is much more easier to observe in genial traits than personality traits, but both are possible. For instance, you know that many musicians presented very high ability to music at the age of 3, 4, 5, even in field of dance. Surely.
Psychoneurotics do hold the hope for the world.
I am. Well, this I am sure. But I repeat that this term, interneurotic and intraneurotic differences of level of functions, try to answer for such opinion that, well, Dabrowski sees in neurotics always very great creativity and so on. And so I can say that in my work, I can say that, well, on the basis of biographies, I will come back at the next session. About 97% in eminent personality was neurotics, psychoneurotics, or even borderline psychosis or nervousness. And in my research work, not the same, but near to this. But I cannot say contrary, that all psychoneurotics are gifted. No. I can say that almost all very gifted are psychoneurotics, but not contrary. And well, this should be accepted, because, well, I have heard many opinions about one-sided opinions about this.
But with respect to the goal of psychotherapy, then would you see a possibility that perhaps those psychoneurotics that do not show potential for productivity or creativity, perhaps if they integrated at a lower level, they might well make some type of contribution, or at least fulfill certain roles in society, which the neurotics at a higher level would not fulfill.
And I underline this in my book on psychotherapy, which is prepared for publication. Surely, in some cases, yes. Perhaps if you see not too much possibility for creativity, for further development, and you have in some psychoneurotic very unpleasant feeling, And if you see that they are searching for something like primitive integration, more primitive integration, you should do this. Why not? But in mostly of cases, this is not the case.